We're really conditioned to believe that an official conclusion is just the end of a story.
Right, like the final chapter.
Exactly, the final chapter. You wait for the authorities to gather the facts, they issue a ruling, and suddenly, a chaotic, terrifying event is just put into a neat, easily understood box.
And we like that box.
We do. It gives everyone a sense of closure. But what happens when the box itself is the actual problem? I mean, what happens when an official ruling feels less like an answer and more like a carefully constructed wall meant to keep everyone out?
It creates a massive public rupture.
It does. And welcome to today's deep dive. I'm so glad you're here with us. Today we're taking you into a case that is just dominating headlines right now and honestly tearing open some of the deepest historical wounds in this country.
We're looking at the death of Nolan Wells.
Right. An 18-year-old black man who died during a July 4th boat trip in Mississippi.
And the official ruling from local police came down incredibly fast. They called it an, quote, accidental drowning. And almost immediately, that phrase just ignited a massive, organized rejection from the community. People are literally taking to the streets, demanding federal intervention.
So, to help you understand the friction between the official story and this massive public outrage, we're relying on two comprehensive analytical articles today.
Right. We have The Burden of History and the Death of Nolan Wells, and a second article titled The Case of Nolan Wells, Mississippi Race and Accountability.
And I want to be really explicit with you right up front. These articles pull absolutely no punches.
None.
They contain highly charged, deeply critical political and racial analysis. And our job today is definitely not to take a side.
Right. We're not endorsing the viewpoints or the political conclusions of the authors.
No, not at all. Our only mission today is to act as your guides. We are just impartially reporting on the text to put the author's arguments under the microscope. We want to show you exactly why this specific case, in this specific state, is setting off so many institutional alarms.
So basically, we're going to examine the glaring red flags surrounding the timeline of Nolan's death.
And the legal loopholes created by the phrase accidental drowning, right?
Exactly. That, plus the centuries of very specific Mississippi history that the authors argue make the public's skepticism not just, reasonable, but entirely necessary.
So let's jump in. The timeline is really where the friction starts, and we should probably look at the sheer geography of this incident first.
Right, the location is crucial.
According to the sources, Nolan Wells went on this July 4th boat trip with a group of white friends to a remote, underdeveloped barrier island off the coast of Mississippi.
Yeah, so we aren't talking about a crowded public beach with lifeguards and concession stands here.
No, we are talking about extreme isolation.
And that isolation is a critical variable because when you're on a remote island, the logistics of leaving are, they're deliberate.
Yeah.
You don't just wander off and catch a cab. You have to actively pack up a boat, start the engine, navigate the water, and physically return to the mainland.
It takes effort.
Exactly. And the sources highlight a pretty chilling sequence of events. The group Nolan was with, the absolute last people to see him alive, they managed to do all of those deliberate things and return home.
But Nolan didn't.
Nolan did not.
And here is the detail that truly, it just stops you in your tracks when you read it. Those companions did not file a missing persons report.
Nothing.
The people who were actually on the island, who supposedly realized someone from their own boat was gone, stayed completely silent.
Yeah.
It was Nolan's family, who were nowhere near the trip, who were completely separate from the incident, who eventually realized he was missing and had to, officially report it to the authorities.
And the timeline gets even tighter from there, according to the text. While the family is frantically filing that report, the sources emphasize that the companions were engaging in a very different type of urgency.
Oh, yeah.
Before investigators had even completed any preliminary findings, like before the body was even located, these companions rapidly retained defense attorneys.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second here.
Sure.
If you are anywhere near a police investigation in the modern era, rule number one from, any legal expert is get a lawyer.
Sure.
You don't talk to the police without counsel, period.
Right. That's standard advice.
So why do the sources view this specific instance of hiring legal counsel as this massive glaring red flag indicating guilt rather than just, smart, modern legal self-preservation?
It comes down to the sequencing. It's the complete absence of a panic phase.
The panic phase.
Yeah. The authors argue that when an accidental tragedy occurs among friends, the natural, immediate human response is a frantic search.
Right, like if we're at a cool party or a camping trip and a friend just vanishes, your first human instinct is to call the police. You call the Coast Guard, alert the family.
Exactly, because the priority is rescuing the person. You might hire a lawyer much later if the police start acting aggressively towards you, sure.
But bypassing the rescue phase entirely.
Right. Failing to notify the family and jumping straight to criminal defense attorneys before a body is even found. The sources argue that specific sequence signals an immediate awareness of legal exposure.
It prioritizes self-protection over the life of a missing person.
Exactly. The authors literally call it the behavior of people who already know a rescue is impossible.
Wow, which makes the subsequent police actions so jarring. I mean, days later, Nolan's body is found on that underdeveloped island, and the Mississippi police almost immediately rule the death an accidental drowning.
And this brings us to a really crucial distinction the authors make in the articles.
Right, the canyon between a physical cause of death and the actual story.
Exactly. The term accidental drowning functions as a highly effective legal shield. The authors explain that drowning is, at its core, simply a physiological mechanism.
It just tells a medical examiner what ultimately stopped the person's heart.
Right. In this case, water in the lungs depriving the brain of oxygen. But the problem is, it is completely silent on the mechanics of the event itself.
It leaves the entire how completely blank.
Yes.
Like, how did he get in the water? Did he slip on a rock? Was he stranded by the boat and forced to try and swim across a channel?
Was he physically assaulted or incapacitated before he ever even touched the shoreline?
We don't know. The phrase accidental drowning essentially acts as a firewall that stops anyone from asking those questions.
And we really have to look at how that firewall operates mechanically within a police department.
Okay, unpack that.
An accidental classification is basically an administrative off-ramp.
Right.
It requires no perpetrator. It means prosecutors don't have to build a case, detectives don't have to subpoena text messages or cell phone location data.
And investigators don't have to conduct hard adversarial interrogations of the people on that boat.
Precisely. It abruptly shuts down the entire machinery of the justice system. For the companions who never reported him missing, it represents the absolute most favorable legal outcome imaginable.
And I want to make sure we're capturing the community's exact stance here, based strictly on the text. Because the people marching in the streets, they aren't claiming they possess some secret smoking gun video that proves a murder took place, right?
Oh, not at all.
They aren't writing the final chapter themselves. The community isn't saying, we know exactly what happened. They're just saying the official story is premature.
That's exactly it. The community is resisting the rush to closure. The authors point out a glaring lack of forensic rigor in the initial investigation.
Right.
For example, in a complex water death, investigators should rely on hydrological evidence.
Hydrological evidence.
Yeah, that means mapping the specific tidal currents of the barrier island, analyzing the temperature of the water, and looking for specific diatoms.
Diatoms, what are those?
Microscopic algae in the lungs. It helps determine exactly where the intake of water occurred.
Oh, wow.
But according to the sources, none of that deep, specialized analysis was completed and presented to the public before the local police just rushed to close the book.
And this immediate refusal by the public to accept the official word, this deep skepticism we're seeing, it makes a terrifying kind of sense when you look at the geography.
Absolutely.
Because this isn't happening in a vacuum. It is deeply, fundamentally tied to the specific geography and history of Mississippi.
And the sources argue that you really cannot separate the Nolan Wells investigation from the soil and the water where it took place.
So let's get into that. What does the historical context provided in the articles actually tell us?
Well, it's staggering. For Black Americans, Mississippi represents arguably one of the darkest chapters in American racial history.
Yeah.
The authors cite data from the Equal Justice Initiative. They documented 4,084 racial terror lynchings in the South between 1877 and 1950.
And Mississippi had the highest number, right?
Yes. Mississippi had the highest total of any state, with 654 documented lynchings, and researchers widely acknowledge that number is merely a baseline.
Right, because it's limited by what was actually officially recorded. But the sources highlight a detail that really shifts how you view the Nolan Wells case specifically. Because, when we think of the public memory of lynching, the image is almost always hanging.
Right.
But the texts point out that drowning was routinely utilized as a method of racial murder.
And there's a reason for that. It's because of the mechanical advantages water provides to a perpetrator.
It destroys the physical evidence.
Completely. It washes away DNA, fibers, and fingerprints. It scatters remains. Remote waterways provide perpetrators with geographic isolation, which limits any potential witnesses.
So it was a tactical choice.
Yes. Throughout the Jim Crow era, Black Americans were frequently thrown into rivers or disappeared into swamps. It gave the perpetrators a built-in, plausible alibi.
And this is where the history intersects directly with the coroner's office, which is chilling.
Yeah.
Historically, local coroners weren't always trained medical examiners, right? They were
Yeah.
often local politicians or part of the very same power structure that was protecting the perpetrators.
Exactly.
The sources list these haunting, repetitive phrases found in historical archives. Things like, he drowned, no foul play, he ran away.
Phrases used for generations to explain away Black deaths.
Right, these weren't medical findings. They were institutional excuses. They were legally laundering racial violence.
The coroners would check the box for accidental. The grand juries would subsequently decline to indict anyone, and the investigations would be closed within days. The machinery was explicitly designed to produce silence.
It really makes you realize that the Black community's reaction today is essentially institutional muscle memory.
That's a good way to put it.
It's a survival reflex. I mean, think of it this way. It's like touching a hot stove. If your family has lived in a house where the wiring has repeatedly caught fire for a century, and someone tells you the sudden smoky smell is just a harmless coincidence, you don't politely believe them.
No, you don't.
If your family has been burned by phrases like, it was an accident, for generations, questioning that phrase isn't paranoia. It is a learned historical vigilance.
The authors argue strongly that Black Americans do not approach a case like Nolan Wells with a blank slate.
How could they?
Right. When a young Black man dies under highly suspicious circumstances, is last seen with white companions who immediately hire lawyers, and the local police instantly rule it an accident without presenting forensic data. That historical muscle memory is violently activated.
And that muscle memory was forged in some very specific, famous fires. The texts point to historical templates that completely cemented this distrust in the justice system.
Yes, the most prominent one being the murder of Emmett Till in Mississippi in 1955.
Right. The Emmett Till case is basically the primary historical template for this story.
It is. Till's murderers were known. The evidence was overwhelming. They actually faced trial. But an all-white jury acquitted them in just 67 minutes.
I mean, 67 minutes to acquit self-evident murderers? That's barely enough time to elect a jury foreperson and order a round of coffees. It is just a brazen display of a predetermined outcome.
And the aftermath was even more insidious. Protected by the legal standard of double jeopardy, meaning they could not be tried again for the same crime, those men later confessed publicly to the murder in a paid magazine interview.
Just flaunting it.
Exactly. There was zero state accountability. None.
The articles also pull this forward to the modern era, referencing the Ahmaud Arbery case in Georgia.
Okay. Yes. Another crucial example.
Because the initial police response in that case was basically to accept the perpetrator's narrative of self-defense. It wasn't even treated as a murder by authorities until a video was leaked online.
Right. The video shattered the official firewall and forced the public to pay attention.
Which perfectly illustrates the lesson the authors are highlighting here. Never mistake the first official explanation for the final truth.
In both the Till case and the Arbery case, separated by decades, local institutions initially closed ranks to protect the narrative of the perpetrators. The system did not volunteer the truth.
Which places an unimaginable, crushing burden on the grieving families. The sources draw this direct, tragic line from Mamie Till to the Wells family today.
Yeah, that part of the text is powerful.
Mamie Till had to demand an open casket, forcing the world to look at the brutality inflicted on her son, because the state of Mississippi wanted to quietly bury the truth.
And fast forward to 2026, and the Wells family is the one having to file the missing persons report because Nolan's companions wouldn't do it.
Exactly. The burden of demanding justice, of doing the actual investigative pushing, it always seems to fall on the Black families, never the state institutions.
It is an unbroken pattern. The families carry the weight of demanding answers that the institutions show absolutely no urgency to provide.
But the authors of these articles make a pretty crucial pivot here, don't they?
They do. They don't just rely on historical anecdotes to make their point. They
Yeah.
bring in hard, modern statistical evidence.
To prove that this justice gap isn't just a ghost of the past. It is a measurable, systemic reality today. So how does this unbroken pattern of families fighting for answers translate into those broader modern statistics? Like, what are the actual mechanics of this systemic underinvestment?
Well, the demographic disparity is stark. The sources cite data from the CDC indicating that while Black Americans make up 13.6% of the U.S. population, they represent roughly 35% of all homicide victims.
Wow. Okay.
But the true systemic failure is really revealed in the institutional response to those deaths. Research published in major criminology journals, which is backed by data from the Violence Policy Center, documents that cases with Black victims receive measurably fewer investigative resources.
And fewer resources isn't just some vague term.
No.
Mechanically, that means a department might not assign its most senior homicide detectives to the case. It means they don't authorize the overtime pay required to do massive neighborhood canvassing.
Or it means the local crime lab might place the forensic samples at the absolute bottom of the priority queue.
Exactly. And the downstream effect of that mechanical underinvestment is that these cases have significantly lower prosecution rates.
And they go unsolved far more frequently than comparable cases with white victims.
Right.
But the most damning statistic cited in the sources, and the one directly relevant to Nolan Wells, is that studies specifically show that accidental or undetermined death rulings occur at measurably higher rates in cases involving Black victims.
Especially in southern states with documented histories of racial violence.
Exactly.
So when the authors look at the incredibly fast accidental drowning ruling in the Nolan Wells case, they aren't just seeing one anomalous, tragic oversight by a small-town police department.
No, they are seeing the exact same statistical machinery operating exactly as it was designed to.
That is the ultimate synthesis of these articles, isn't it? During the lynching era, the machinery of racial murder relied on silence, speed, and institutional cover.
Right, and here, the companion stayed silent, the local authorities ruled quickly.
The investigation was ushered toward immediate closure.
Exactly. The authors argue that this identical machinery of silence and speed is echoing today in the institutional underinvestment in Black lives.
This is exactly why digging into the mechanics of these sources matters so much. Because when you see a community protesting on the news, holding up signs demanding an independent investigation, it is so easy for an outside observer to dismiss it as just raw grief.
Or emotion, or an inability to accept a tragic accident.
Exactly. But these texts prove that their demand is backed by empirical data, hydrological science, and centuries of documented lethal history. They know exactly what a cover-up looks like because they have the historical receipts.
The message from the community, as framed by the authors, is a flat refusal to let history teach them to stop asking questions.
So, based on the roadmap in these sources, what are the concrete demands being made by the family right now?
The demands are highly specific, and they're really designed to bypass the local firewall. First, the family is demanding a fully independent autopsy conducted by a medical examiner who is completely free from the immediate bias of the local police department's premature ruling.
That makes total sense.
Second, they're demanding full forensic transparency. They don't just want a summary report. They want the raw hydrological data, the physical evidence logs, and the unredacted timeline.
And
Third, they are demanding accountability and sworn depositions for everyone who was on that boat.
Wow.
As the authors state, for a community that has endured generations of unexplained deaths in the water, demanding these answers is not an act of cynicism.
Right.
It is an act of memory. It is about protecting the fundamental dignity of Nolan Wells.
It's about forcing the system to actually earn its conclusion, rather than letting it just assume the most convenient one at the outset.
Exactly.
Well, this has been an incredibly heavy, complex dive into these materials, and we have covered a massive amount of historical and legal terrain today.
We really have.
But before we go, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something for you to explore that builds on the tension we've discussed today. The sources thoroughly detail how remote waterways and rural geography were historically weaponized by perpetrators.
Right, because the isolation limited witnesses and the water physically destroyed the evidence.
Exactly. That was a reliable playbook for over a century. But in 2026, we live in an era of ubiquitous digital footprints.
Oh, that's an interesting point.
Think about the sheer volume of silent data on that remote island. We are talking about cellular location data, pinging off coastal towers, digital timestamps on text messages sent or unsent, and advanced hydrological drone mapping that can chart exact currents and depths in real time.
The digital footprint is huge.
Right. So how might this modern technological reality finally disrupt this century-old playbook of using geography to hide the truth? Will the silent, objective data resting on a cell phone server somewhere finally force a transparency that human institutions have historically denied?
It really is a fascinating tension. The intersection of historical legal patterns colliding with undeniable modern digital evidence.
It is the ultimate collision course, and it really makes you wonder if the old geographical ways of hiding the truth can even survive the digital age.
Ugh.
Thank you so much for joining us and trusting us to guide you through this deep dive into these challenging sources.
Yes, thank you.
We appreciate you taking the time to unpack the mechanics of this vital topic with us. Take care of yourselves, keep asking the hard questions, and we'll see you next time.